Welcome to Memento Argentum, or, in this instance, Memento Liber, where we review books. This time it's Bunny Call. Told you I'd review it. This book is another thin one. It's actually, I think, on par with the first book, so that's a bit unusual. I am going to be doing the stories in reverse order for a very specific reason for this book. However, there's something else I need to do first. Scott, I'm waving the whiteboard. I give up with my complaint regarding the third book. One of them. Most of the other complaints were completely valid, and this one technically still stands, but for some strange reason you're proceeding anyway. Bunny Call, all four of the main characters in these stories are adults. All of them. So I have to take back what I said regarding book 3. However, book 3 and book 5, now with Bunny Call, are the only two books with adults as the main characters. I don't know if that's an improvement. In my opinion, because these are still marketed towards kids, because look at that art. It's an amazing artwork. Like, oh my gosh, the artwork on these covers is fantastic, and I've seen some of the concept art for some of the other stories before they got removed. But it's clearly marketed towards preteens, teens, young adults, or even children, because this looks very child-friendly. And yet, you have main characters who are middle-aged as the people that these children are supposed to relate to. And I have serious issues with that. But I'm waving the whiteboard. I give up. I won't complain about that from now on. Or at least I'll try not to. I will explain why I'm doing the stories in reverse order. The 3 stories in this particular book, aside from the Stitch Wraith, are Bunny Call in the Flesh and The Man in Room 1280. So I'm going to start with 1280 first, and I'm just going to call it that because the title, The Man in Room 1280, is a little bit long-winded. The main character's name is Arthur, or Father Blythe, because he is a priest. The other main character in this story, because this is the one story with 2 main characters technically, is named Mia. Father Blythe is visiting a hospital, specifically to, I guess, give last rites to this one patient, the man in room 1280, and Mia is just starting to work at the hospital. And so Arthur is clearly a good character. Like, he's trying to see good in the world. In fact, he's one of the few positive characters in the past couple of books, in particular, that we've seen. He's truly trying to do good, and even Mia is trying to do good. Like, they are actually seeking out goodness and trying to encourage it in others, which is amazing. I loved reading that. I don't know if it should be 80 pages long. Some of the information that was portrayed in the story felt superfluous. It felt unnecessary, and especially thanks to story number 2, it got amplified. I don't like feeling like you're including extra information just to give the character personality, when it's not actually personality, it's you just going, oh yeah, and they do this sometimes. Now, while I do like the fact that Mia's boyfriend is apparently an amazing cook and makes amazing sandwiches, and I actually kind of want a sandwich by him now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to include that in the story. It could have just been them having a lunch, and it was a nice lunch because the sandwich was good. And yeah, her boyfriend could cook. Cool. But it was held onto for a while in the story, and that seemed a little strange. That, oddly enough, that's one of the few instances that didn't feel out of place. Why did I remember that one? But Man in Room 1280, the Man in Room 1280 is a character that is very, very obviously an inference towards another character in the series. Based off of the way I know it, I would believe that he is from Fazbear Fright, the horror attraction. He is from the Aftermath. That is my guess. It's either that or from Fazbear Pizzeria. One of those two. That makes it a very interesting story, though. And actually, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, it's more likely to be Fazbear Pizzeria. Because the nurses make a point of saying that it's almost like there are two minds in this one body fighting and tormenting each other. Like they're in hell. And I found that really cool. Like, it was a very nice thing to realize. Now, Arthur tries to figure out what's going on, and he wants to do right by this man who he's never met before, who can't actually speak vocally, but Arthur finds that he can spell things out with his finger. So he has the man spell out what he wants, where he wants to go. And the man spells out a Fazbear entertainment place. So Arthur is trying to get that done, while the nurses know that that man is evil and should not leave the hospital. So it was an interesting story. I do feel like some of it could have been cut, but this book is very skinny. Like, it's not a big book, but I felt like there was a little bit of fat on them bones, and I don't know that it was all appreciated as much. Some of it was enjoyable, but I believe, yeah, Man in Room 1280 is the longest story in this book at 80 pages. And it felt like the longest. Well, only barely. So I do think that it probably should have gotten a little bit trimmed down. I'm not saying it needed to be hacked to pieces. I'm just saying little bits here and there could have been removed and nothing would have been lost from the story. The second story I'm going to be talking about is the middle story called In the Flesh. In the Flesh. The premise is that Matt is a video game designer and he's designing a new game called Springtrap's Revenge. And he's a little bit jaded by women. What else is new in this series? Let's name a man who isn't jaded by women aside from Arthur. This story is only 49 pages long. And, oh, I completely forgot to mention, this is the first book to credit the authors for each story. The first story was written by Andrea Wagner, the second by Ellie Cooper, and the third by Andrea Wagner. So that is kind of awesome because I would love to know who wrote some of the stories. And hopefully that trend continues in the next book called Blackbird, apparently. Cover art's awesome looking. So a little bit of a nitpick that kicked into my brain when I was reading this story. It's a little strange that from their names, and yes, this could be me misgendering someone, but from their names, I would guess that all of the authors so far, excluding Scott Cawthon, have been female. And yet they keep writing males who are jaded by women. So do they hate women, or is that just supposed to be the character? Or do they hate guys and they're trying to write incels? I'm not sure, and I don't know if I want the answer or not. It just feels very strange how many men in these stories have been women. God, I hate them. But I'll date them like nobody's business, or I'll sleep with them, or how could that woman dump me? And yes, I was about to use a different word, but I'm trying to keep it family friendly. So Matt is a video game designer. Sorry, getting back to In the Flesh, sorry. Matt is a video game designer designing Springtrap's Revenge. He had a messy divorce, second divorce, and he basically poured all of his frustration towards women into the titular character of the video game, Springtrap. And then he realized that Springtrap is a little too difficult to defeat, or he's just too impatient. I'm not sure which. The only other major nitpick that I have for this story is the fact that For a video game designer, he tries very few times to get through his own video game before deciding it's a piece of crap and deciding that he's going to take revenge on the Cyber Bunny. He literally tries a total of 3 times before deciding that Springtrap needs to be tortured. And I'm not joking. He literally, sorry, my board is making noises. He literally puts Springtrap in a perma motion in the video game until he returns the next day, 10 hours later or 9 hours later. So literally this video game character is wandering around in a maze, because that's the premise of the video game, is a maze where Springtrap is hunting you down and you're trying to get through the maze. Springtrap is literally wandering through the maze looking for someone to kill for 9 hours. Not only that, he makes it worse by making every minute 1,000 minutes. Like, he translates it into working 1,000 times faster than it should be. So literally Springtrap is just experiencing days in this video game without a victim. So he comes into work the next day and he finds that Springtrap is messed up. Well, the game itself is messed up. He can't find Springtrap. When he looks into the code has gone haywire. This is, I believe, actually the shortest story out of the group. Yeah, because I said Dance With Me was the shortest before, and that was 50 pages. This one is literally 1 page shorter, at 49. Sorry, gotta check my notes. Otherwise, I'll never keep any of this straight. The thing that turns into in the flesh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep messing that one up because it's hard not to say into. In the flesh, the thing that sets in the flesh higher on my opinion of it is the ending. That thing that I was mad about in book 3 with the new kid and book 4 with Step Closer, In the Flesh did it right. That was an amazing ending. That was the way to end a story. Holy cow, that made up for all that crap we put up with. Because frankly, 49 pages felt a little long at times with Matt being our narrator. He is not a pleasant character. So when the ending hit, I went, oh my God, I think that one just became amazing. So I really enjoyed In the Flesh because of the ending. Sometimes the endings can win me over because otherwise I probably wouldn't like that story very much. Okay, so third story, which is the first story in the book, Bunny Call. Bunny Call is 75 pages long. The main character's name is Bob. He's the father of 3, has a loving wife, and I have major issues with this story. One of them is, how does this connect to the Fazbear universe? There is nothing connecting it to the Fazbear universe outside of this rabbit looking like Glitch Trap from Help Wanted. That is the only connection. Fazbear Entertainment is loosely referenced, not directly referenced, loosely referenced as that pizzeria Bob used to go to as a kid. I don't understand what this story is doing in this series because it has nothing to do with FNAF. And it stands out in even more sharp contrast when you realize that the second and third stories are directly referencing Pizzeria Simulator and Help Wanted. They are directly referencing them. Because I'm sorry, but In the Flesh feels like it's the developer that was mentioned in Help Wanted as being a hack or something similar. Like, it's that unfortunate connection to Fazbear and video games. And that's a direct reference to Help Wanted in that sense. Man in Room 1280, direct reference to Pizzeria Simulator. So I don't understand how Bunny Call fits into this universe outside of Glitch Trap, which, by the way, that's not his name in this book. His name is Ralpho. Ralpho has never been a part of the universe before. This This design showed up in Help Wanted once, minus the symbols. Because yeah, he's holding symbols. Bob is an unpleasant character. The story is 75 pages long, I'm sure I've already said it, but it felt like twice that length. If I thought that some things needed to be trimmed from 1280, this one needed to be hacked. Not only were there issues with the amount of descriptors used for characters, sometimes totaling 6 descriptors for a character that is referenced in one conversation once. They have one conversation with the main character and then are never seen again. But they get 6 words to describe them outside of the normal words. Like, he's tall. Okay, that's a descriptor. Yeah, but he's tall and lanky with this and this. Like, it's ridiculous the amount of descriptors. At one point, the mountains are described as having craggy tops. Adding into that. Okay, hold on. Before I go into that rant, I'm going to explain what Bunny Call is about, because I immediately segued into the rant, which is why I waited. The reason I waited for this story is because of how many problems it has. Bob and his family are going to a family camp. They're going there for a week. They're going to enjoy themselves, even though Bob really just wanted to stay home and go fishing. Or go there and go fishing, but then he's told that fishing is a competitive sport at the family camp, and so he can't just go off and do it. He has to do family activities almost the entire time. So they get to the camp, 22 pages in. Just let that sink in. It takes them 22 pages to get to the camp, which is the plot of the book or story. 22 pages in, they get to the camp. He gets out of the van and his wife, like, this is one of the stories that made me think that maybe Andrea Wagner maybe slightly hates women. I'm not sure. I don't really want to, like, guess, but it feels like she hates women because, oh my God, all of the women are shrews or horrible in this story. Not just slightly bad. I mean, they're like horrible because Wanda, Bob's wife, commands him to take all of the luggage, not just his and hers, but all of the luggage to their cabin, which is at the furthest end from camp, and he can't park the vehicle next to the building. He has to park it in the parking lot on the other side. He goes to sign up for all their activities because his wife hands him lists and demands that he does that and then unpack their luggage. Again, underlining how she's a terrible person. And so he goes to stand in line with all the other people. But I'm sorry, I get the feeling it's mostly husbands because there was a specific line stating that all of the husbands were the ones lugging the luggage around. Which is hilarious because in my family, we were always told to take our own bags. And if we couldn't carry our own bags, especially at 10 years old, which is his oldest, we weren't taking that bag to wherever we were going. If you can't carry your luggage, you're not taking it with you. That was the mindset. So he gets in line to sign up for things. I'm trying to stay on track. I'm sorry. And when he gets up to the front of the line, he's talking to the woman who is getting everyone signed up. And she notices how harried he is, and she goes, "Would you be interested in a bunny call?" And he goes, "What's a bunny call?" And she points to a suit in the corner. And she goes, "That's Ralpho. He'll wake your family up early at 5 a.m. Oh, well, between 5 and 6 a.m. And he'll do it by making a ton of noise and a ton of racket, and it'll be amazing." And Bob goes, "Oh my God, that would be an amazing prank. Sure, sign me up." That's the hook to get the plot going, by the way. So he continues to hang out with his family who are driving him nuts. Like we get to be in Bob's head as he gets driven nuts by his family. But he has a change of heart. and he decides to try and make amends by calling off the bunny call. Doesn't really work because by the time he realizes it, it's way past the time, like it's past 11 p.m. when he decides that he wants to renege on the bunny call. The premise of the story is him trying to keep Ralpho out of his house. Now, I will admit, the end section of the story, for the most part, did keep me engrossed. I was able to read it pretty easily. And I did enjoy it once it got to that point. However, again, I state, I feel like Bunny Call did not need to be 75 pages long. It should have been much shorter. It should not have taken 22 pages to get to the camp. The entire 22 pages almost was Bob complaining about his family mixed with a little bit of background. And by a little bit, I mean a little bit. Like, he gets to the camp, they're at a bonfire, and that's when we learn what his job is. We don't learn about it until he's at the camp. This story is kind of a mess, structurally. The other two problems actually are, there's massive grammatical errors in this story. Like, the way sentences are constructed, there are massive run-on sentences multiple times in this story. I'm pretty sure it's double digits, the amount of run-on sentences. And there's a specific, hold on, I'm gonna see if I can find it right off the bat. It's not that far, hold on. I am fairly certain. I know which side of the thing it is, it's just I'm trying to find. There we go. There is a specific actual spelling error in this story. He pulled the minivan into the right lane as the road starting climbing upward, and the 2 lanes turned into 3, creating a passing lane. That should have been started, not starting. This is in a published book. I am not trying to say that Andrea Wagner can't write because she's been writing for the other books. I have not noticed any spelling errors prior to this book. That's part of the reason it stuck out to me. The other issue that I found, and in order to make sure that I wasn't just imagining this, I went back and reread a couple of the other stories. I read the main stories for each of the other books, the titular stories, just to make sure. This story has a ridiculously high amount of times that the name Bob is spoken, well written. I wrote it down on the board, so I'm going to read it off. Bunny Call has 465 times that the name Bob is spoken. By the way, I based this off of specifically the name that they are going off of. So if it wasn't Bob, it was Matt. I tried Matt as well. So I'll read you off what I found. Bunny Call had 465 times that the name Bob was used. That averages 6 times a page. That's ignoring the fact that I was going at 5-page increments, and one of those 5-page increments had it 58 times, I believe. 58 times in 5 pages. In the flesh, because I did all 3 of these. Well, I did 2 of them, and then I started to do the 3rd, and I had trouble. I'll explain. In the flesh, had 217 times where Matt was named or used. 217 times in 49 pages. You know what that averages out to? A little over 4 times a page. Man in room 1280. I stopped counting after the 44th page only because it kept flipping between Arthur and Mia. I did not feel comfortable adding both of their names together because sometimes they were having conversations. Actually, quite frequently they were having conversations together, and that felt like I was doubling up when I wasn't. So based off of what I saw, I was only basing it off of Arthur's name. The man in room 1280, Arthur was said 230 times in those 44 pages, which averages 5 times a page. Bunny Call was 6 times a page, and it was actually over 6 times a page. I rounded down because it was like 6.3 times a page or something like that. In the Flesh was a little over 4 times a page. Man in Room 1280, a little over 5 times a page. I then went into the pit. Titular story. It is said 277 times in a 65-page story. That is an average of a little over 4 times a page. Little over 4 times a page. Fetch. Sorry, I'll raise it up. Fetch. It was said 486 times, which sounds like an ungodly amount of time. Hold on. It was 85 pages long. It was said approximately a little over 5.5 times a page. Step Closer. I don't like this book, but I still have to give it credit for it was spoken. The main character's name was said, Delilah, was said 350 times in 73 pages. That is an average of a little over 4.5 times a page. That's one good thing that came out of this book. Step Closer. Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed that up. 1:35 a.m. Sorry, 1:35 a.m. 495 times in 87 pages, which averages a little over 5.5 times a page. Sorry, I mixed them up. I was not reading my own handwriting correctly. I don't know what happened. It's 495 times, a little over 5.5 times a page for 87 pages. And then Step Closer was 350 times in 73 pages, little over 4.5 times. You know what all of them have in common? They're not 6 times a page. And none of them had a grouping like 58 times in 5 pages. None of them. There was not a single one of these ones, or even the other 2 in this. And I'm calling this out. Andrew Wagner, I have a feeling, did the Stitch Wraith story as well. The Stitch Wraith story and Man in Room 1280, both of them had nowhere near the name count that the first story did. The other issue that I have, aside from the fact that the name was spoken so many times, is the fact that it's the name Bob. It's not Robert. It's not anything else. It's not like Bobby as a nickname, because I didn't count nicknames. Anytime someone mentioned a nickname, like this one, Oswald, whenever someone called him Oz, I did not count it. For Man in Room 1280, anytime someone called him Father Blythe instead of Arthur, because Arthur thought of himself as Arthur, I did not count Father Blythe. I can't think of any of the others that really had major nicknames. But, like, that's my point. I wasn't counting nicknames. I was only counting that specific name. And Bob showed up 465 times. And yeah, it's less than 2 of the other ones. 495 for 1:35 a.m. and 486 for Fetch. That's true. But both of those stories were 10 pages more. They were 10 pages more, and they were only 20 to 30 more names, which doesn't sound like much, but when you got a 5-page split with 58 times, seems kind of extreme. So I know I'm probably ragging on this way too much, but it's obvious when you're reading the story, the amount of times that it's like, Bob did this, Bob did this, Bob did this, Bob did this. And this isn't me saying that Andrea Wagner can't write, because she clearly can. I'm willing to bet one of my favorites is something that she's written. I'm willing to bet it, because she's been involved in, except for that's just Ellie Cooper, which she's not a bad author either. But these 3 have all have Andrea Wagner's name on it, which means she did a story, at least one story from each of these. I found things to like about 2 of these. This one is arguable, but I didn't have complaints regarding grammatical errors or the amount of times a name was said until this book and Bunny Call. I have serious issues with this first story. I don't think that it should have been the way it was. I know that this is not likely to be seen by Scott or by either of the authors, Ellie or Andrea, or any of the previous authors, because I believe there's been a couple of others. This is not me trying to go, oh my God, do your job correctly. You had one job to do. It's not me doing that. It's me going, did you rush to put out especially the first story? That's my question. Because the rest of the series hasn't had those major grammatical errors, and this one literally had a spelling error in it. This book literally had a spelling error, ignoring the run-on sentences as well, because those were insane. There was one that was basically a paragraph long. I know that this is not likely to be seen by them. I know it isn't. However, I would still like to make this offer. I would be more than happy to help. And I know this sounds really pompous. I obviously know more than you. No, I would be more than happy to help work on editing for these stories for no payment, because I don't care about payment for this. I just want to improve the series. I want to encourage this series to continue because I've enjoyed some of the stories. I enjoyed 2 of the stories in this book. The Bunny Call, the biggest gripe I've got with it is the fact that it doesn't have much attachment to the rest of the series. That's my biggest issue with it, which is nothing compared to 2 of the other stories that I've had major issues with. So, I mean, I enjoyed this book, even though I had major issues with the first story in particular. Second story a little bit, and the third story as well. Please, if you are having trouble keeping track of the stories, keeping track of how developed they are, I am more than happy to help. You can send me a message or something. I can't promise I'm much better than like a professional editor. No one can. I don't do it for a living, and I know that. But I still want to offer because I do feel passionately about this series. I do want to see it succeed because this is a really enjoyable series, even though I feel like it's been misadvertised. But I still have really genuinely enjoyed this series. And I just want to make the offer of, if you want another eye on it, and don't worry, if I actually got on board with these, I'd still be reviewing the books when they were published. I would not say anything regarding if I was involved in the writing process, because that's not how I work. I work based off of, was it an enjoyable story? Sorry for stuttering. So if someone happens to see this and points me out to Scott, please, dude, I have full respect for what you're trying to do with this series. I'm a little confused by books 3 and 5 as to why they've got adults as the main characters. I don't quite understand all of it. I can understand some adult characters, but not all 3 of the stories in this book being adults, because you're losing one of your primary audiences, and that feels weird to me. Okay, so I should go through the ranking. My ranking for books, specifically the books, not the stories, still Into the Pit at top. It's still on top. Second place still goes to Fetch, because both of those are still the most solid out of the books overall. They haven't had major hiccups to them. Slot 3 is Step Closer, because in my opinion, Step Closer had stronger individual stories than Bunny Call did. Bunny Call had good stories, and I would say it's a very close fourth, in my opinion, only because of how Step Closer, the first story in Step Closer, ended. And then 5th place goes to 1:35 a.m. because that's still my least favorite out of the series. I will admit, for the stories, I reorganized a little bit, especially based off of the pattern that I'm starting to see emerge in these books. Based off of the pattern, I have altered my opinion on a couple of the stories. Some of them have dropped. First place goes to Lonely Freddy. That is still my top, period. Like, that is still, in my opinion, one of the best short stories out of the series, if not the best, period. Second place goes to Dance With Me because I genuinely, while Lonely Freddy was this great kick in the gut, Dance With Me was like a warm hug. And I loved it. I really enjoy it when, even though you're writing a horror series, you can still put in happy endings. That's good. I do like that quite a bit. Third place goes to the most controversial placement, Count the Ways. I'm putting Count the Ways third because I don't know what good work is. I'm kidding. There's something about that story that just gets me. Fourth is To Be Beautiful. Fifth is Coming Home. Sixth is Where in the Flesh is Now. In the Flesh, in my opinion, because of that ending, is number 6 out of 16. Number 7 is Out of Stock. Number 8 is Into the Pit. Here's another change. Number 9 is Where Room for One More is Now. In my opinion, Room for One More is less good when comparing it to the other adult stories in this book. Because there are now more adults, I can compare it to other adult stories. Because of that, I feel like Room for One More is not as good as the other stories preceding it. Number 10 is the Stitch Wraith story. It actually bumped. It got bumped. Number 11 is Man in Room 1280. And the only reason the Man in Room 1280 is number 11 is because, not only because of the lore, because I found that enormously fascinating, it stuck the landing. The ending felt right for that story. The beginning felt a little bit clunky. That seems to be a problem with a lot of these short stories, is the opening's a little clunky. That's one thing to be said for In the Flesh. In the Flesh started right and ended perfectly. Oh my gosh. But Man in Room 1280 started a little clunky, and some of the character changes and choices did not make perfect sense, which is why it's 11th. 12 is now Fetch. Fetch dropped down to 12 because when I was rereading it for the Word, I realized I didn't actually enjoy it as much as I remembered. I know that sounds really terrible to say, but upon further inspection, I did not enjoy Fetch as much. 13 is Step Closer. Step Closer, I still believe, is worse than Fetch. That opinion could change later, but it's honestly because of that ending. If that ending wasn't there, Step Closer would have bumped Fetch out of there. Actually, it would have bumped probably the Stitch Wraith easily. Okay, what am I saying? It would have been top 5. Let's not kid ourselves. I loved that story up until that ending. Oh man, that ending killed me. Number 14 is Bunny Call. As much as I ragged on it, Bunny Call to me was more enjoyable for more of the story than the other two that are in the bottom 2. The bottom 3 are Bunny Call, 1:35 a.m., and The New Kid. Now, for me at least, Bunny Call was far more enjoyable because once he started protecting the house from Ralpho, I became completely mesmerized. I finished the story super quick. Prior to that, I was struggling, though, which is why it's down so far. 1:35 a.m. is still second from the bottom because, in my opinion, Delilah still doesn't hold up. She especially doesn't hold up, thanks to In the Flesh taking an unlikable character, which is another thing that The New Kid tried to do, and having them end a specific way, and then that's the ending. Like, In the Flesh did that right. I'm skipping over 1:35 a.m. for a second to rag on New Kid a little bit longer. New Kid ended horribly. It raised a ton more questions right at the end. In the Flesh didn't. In the Flesh went, you know what's coming. We all know what's coming. Let's just make it happen. Like, it was a good kick. It was like that perfect kick. It was very similar to the way I felt about Lonely Freddy, where it's like, ooh, you got kicked. But man, that felt like a good kick. Like, ooh, that was solid. New kid tried to kick you, missed, tried to recover with a twist, and fell flat on its face. I think it slipped on a banana peel. Also, I will admit, I watched a few other people review, and I am aware that most of my opinion about most of these stories is highly unpopular. I know I'm coming from a place of these are what I enjoyed. A lot of the videos I saw ranked Lonely Freddy super low, but in my opinion, that's honestly one of the best stories. It is the best. I saw quite a few people really hate Count the Waves, but that's not a surprise to me. To Be Beautiful, though, ranked really low too. Like, my top 5, I actually didn't see a lot of reviews that included Step Closer. So Dance With Me and Coming Home, which were 2 of my top 5, weren't included. Oh God, in the top 6, I've got 3 from books 4 and 5. But Out of Stock usually rated higher than 7 for people, and for me it was okay. Into the Pit rated way lower for people, and I've got it at 8. So I know that my opinion is very unpopular with the way that I've chosen to do it, but I'm also basing it off of readership. I'm not basing it off of, ooh, there's so much lore in here, or ooh, they referenced my favorite character. And that sounds really judgy, but a lot of the reviews that I came across were younger people. I am an adult. I fully admit that, unfortunately. But a lot of the people that I heard reviewing it were teen, preteen, or child, based off of their voices, because some of them didn't use their cameras. So based off of that, I'm not actually that surprised that I have a very dissimilar list from people. It does make me a little bit sad because, in my opinion, Lonely Freddy deserves way more attention than it's getting. And I do think that Dance With Me is an amazing story, but I also can understand where they're coming from. They want that graphic oomph. So honestly, what's going to happen is In the Flesh is going to hit people's top 5s probably, because that one has a really gory ending. Actually, I'd be willing to bet that Man in Room 1280 will probably rate pretty high on people's lists as well. And I will admit, both of those rated higher than I thought they would. I've rambled on long enough. I do feel like Bunny Call did not make me hate this series. It would take another New Kid equivalent, in my opinion. Oh yeah, and that's another aside. A lot of people chose The New Kid as one of their favorite stories, and I don't quite understand that, because I had major issues with it. But maybe they overlooked the psychotic nature of the main character? That's possible. They might also have not been so annoyed with the ending, but I was reading it from the perspective of someone who reads a lot of short stories, and there are certain expectations that need to be met for an ending, like the one that was attempted in New Kid, and I don't feel like it succeeded, which is why it's bottom. And yes, I'm speaking about it far more calmly than I was before, but that's because I've just accepted the fact that Devin was an incel. And yeah, terrible character. But I'd like to point out In the Flesh, which also had an incel, because I'm sorry, Matt was definitely an incel. In the Flesh had an incel as main character. It's number 6 on my list. So yeah, I don't base it off of whether someone's an incel or not in the story. I do enjoy these stories a lot. I am so happy. When I realized that this had come out and I hadn't realized, I misremembered the date that it was coming out. So I rushed to Target immediately to buy it. It was literally the day we realized it had come out, my friend and I rushed to Target and bought it. That way I could just get to reading it as soon as possible. I genuinely enjoy these books, which is why, again, I will make this statement. Scott, if you are listening, or any of the authors, if you're listening and you want another opinion, if you want someone to just go over your work and maybe see if there's anything that might need to be looked at, because this literally was the first book I've ever found a true spelling error in, and I wasn't even looking for it. And I found it. I found a spelling error. That was the first one in the book series, and that's part of the reason that I'm like, please, I don't need payment. I don't want to get paid for it. I just want to help. I want to offer my help to make this book series something great. Also known as I'm tooting my own horn. Whatever the case, I will review Blackbird when it comes out, which apparently is in December, so that's a bit of a jump. But I look forward to reviewing Blackbird, and I'm really hoping that it has more of the stories that are fun, because too many of these stories start off on such a dour note that it's a relief when you don't have that. See also The Man in Room 1280. The opening wasn't terrible. It started to feel a little terrible when it went on a little too long. There were certain sections where I was like, why was this included? So speaking of going on too long, holy cow, I've gone on way too long. I do apologize for the length of this video, but hopefully you enjoyed listening to me. Oh shoot, Stitch Race story. I know, I'm nearing 50 minutes, but Stitch Race story, really quickly. Holy cow, there was a great progression in this story. That was actually an amazing progression in the Stitch Race story. And I did look forward to it. That's the reason the Stitch Race story jumped, because it was like number 12 or something like that. Like it wasn't 12. It was 10, I think. But it stayed where it was, which means it's doing something right. Like, oh my gosh, I really enjoyed that little turn that it took in the story. I really enjoyed that. I am looking forward to reading more about that Stitch Race. So until next time, I am planning on reviewing Airport. And actually at this point in time, I'm considering doing 2 of the Airport movies in one go, or possibly all 4 in one go, and just doing a big review of it on Monday. This next Monday, obviously. And I hope you'll join me for that. So join me next time for Airport, or possibly the Airport collection. Until then, adieu.